director, Professor Jurgen Ökland, who was also very much involved in this. She will be saying a few words. Anastasia, you will be saying a few words about the Athenæum Friends Association. I would also like to thank her for supporting the reintroduction of the bachelor course from Oslo, a course that is actually a long-standing tradition at the Institute, but has stopped during COVID. So last year we had the first students back to the Institute, and this year we have the pleasure of hosting 16 students of classics and archaeology studying ancient Athens in situ. So a very big thanks from all of us at the Institute, particularly to Robert and Anastasia, for honoring the Institute with their presence. Anastasia, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Delia, for your kind words and for welcoming us to Norwegian Institute, which we all experience as a warm place to be and a welcoming place to be in. On behalf of the board of Athenæum, the Society of Friends of the Norwegian Institute at Athens, I would like to welcome you all, students, colleagues, and friends, and say a few words about the society. It was established, as Delia said, in 2019 at the initiative of Norwegian and Norway-based academics from the humanities and social sciences. And our mission is to provide support to the Norwegian Institute at Athens and to promote understanding of its academic significance and contribution in Greece as well as in Norway. The Friends Association disseminates NIA's projects and academic contributions to the Norwegian academic community and the Norwegian public, while also fostering additional support for academic and research activities from Norwegian universities at the NIA. Our goal is to strengthen academic connections between the Norwegian Institute, the Norwegian academic community, and the Norwegian public. And we're pursuing this goal mainly through the Athenæum Travel Grant, which is open to advanced bachelor to early PhD student whose academic work will draw benefits from a research stay in Athens and connection with the NIA. Athenæum is governed by a board of 8 elected members and currently comprises a diverse group of supporters from both academia and the broader public. And we are constantly in need of additional members so that we can to support our mission and to advance our goals for the benefit of the Norwegian public and the Norwegian Institute. And presently, our objective is to extend our membership to friends and colleagues beyond Norway. So we welcome both new members and donations. And we have also launched an annual lecture series with kind support of NIA, which takes place tonight for the second time. And tonight's speaker, who is my great pleasure and honor to introduce to you, is Dr. Emil Berge, who is has studied theater in Norway and Poland, and is active both as an actor and as a director. He has also studied classical Greek in Ireland, in Oslo, and in Trondheim, where he got his PhD. He received his PhD in 2021 at Athenæum with a thesis entitled Embodied Mimetic Poetry, Text and Performance of Classical Greek Drama. So in this thesis, the theater person and the classicist met. He has also delivered an impressive and important number of translations of works of ancient Greek drama in the series Canon, which Gyldendal runs. The Aristophanes Frogs in 2016, the Euripides Hecuba in 2018, Euripides Helen in 2022, and last year, Aeschylus the Suppliants. I should also say the title in Norwegian, Asylsøkere. That's the title that Robert gave to it, which I think is very pertinent, the asylum seekers. So the topic of tonight's lecture is the mimetic idea of Greek drama, engaging actors' bodily imagination with poetry. And without further delay, I would like to invite tonight's speaker and cede him the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will start by there. Yes, thank you so much for this introduction. I am very happy to have been invited here, and it's wonderful to be here up in Athens and at the Institute, Norwegian Institute here. And I am very much honored to be allowed to hold this second annual Athenæum lecture. I will talk about one of the most, at least for me, interesting and influential ancient art forms. It was a kind of performance that took place here in Athens, just around the corner from where we are now, a couple of thousand years ago. Now it is, so performances are perhaps the most ephemeral of things people are doing. They exist only for the people present at a certain time, at a certain place. And when it is done, it is gone. But because this specific form of performance employed some highly advanced poetry as part of the expression, because this poetry was put into writing, and because a very small portion of these texts have survived until this day, the art form in question has had an immeasurable impact on Western history, art, politics, philosophy, and our ways of lives, so that not one of us goes through the day without being affected by it, if we know it or not. I'm talking about the Greek drama, and today I will first give you a general overview of the art form of Greek drama. It's and then I will go more dive into the texts and how they, what kinds of meanings these texts could be said to convey. I think it will be possible for everyone to get something interesting out of this. These texts that I will talk about, they are perhaps some of the most researched objects that exist, and one should then perhaps think that, oh, we have a quite good idea of how they are supposed to work, but surprisingly to me, at least when I started to learn about Greek drama, there are a lot of things that are still unclear. So I think I have some ideas to how we can come a bit further on this, but of course there are still a lot of questions to be answered in the future. Now, this was what is Greek drama? It was a form of performance, and it was at least the drama that was the texts that we have. They were performed first in this theater. I made that picture on Sunday. it didn't look like that when the dramas of the texts were performed. The stone seatings were and they were not permanent. They had wooden benches probably, and so what we see here is kind of probably more than 100 years after the performances I am mostly interested in, because we have the texts. But it was they had the festivals, 2 big festivals, where poets were invited to compose poems that they competed against each other with. And they had the poems were divided. They had dialogue, and they had chorus, and they made the actors and a chorus of dancers to dance the lyrics, and the actors were performing stories. So, and they were dressed in extravagant costumes, and I guess my impression is that people who came to the performances, they were interested in the dances and the extravagance mostly, and a bit the stories, perhaps. I'm not saying this. I'm guessing that everybody knows everything I'm saying now. I'm just trying to get into that. The texts are like a small part of the whole thing, maybe, or maybe not. We'll get to that. The audience that were seated on the wooden benches, there are different estimations of how many they could be, but I've seen like between 7,000 and 19,000. So let's say probably around 10,000, I guess, could have been in the audience. And the whole thing was like funded by rich citizens and by the city, and it was like not only like entertainment, it was also a very political event. So we so so that there were a lot of, the Greek drama was a lot of things, and now what happened was that all of those things are sort of gone. We have some people wrote about it. That is, a few things are left about how it was organized, what people thought about it. But the main thing that we have left is just what they said and were singing on this during these performances. And from thousands of plays that were made by hundreds of poets, we have 44 remaining plays, 32 tragedies, 1 satire play, and 11 comedies, composed by 3 known tragic poets, and probably, I think, 2 unknown poets, and 1 comic poet, Aristophanes. So our view of this art form is very limited. It's like a bottleneck, as thin as it can be, I guess. So then so if we have this in mind, I will now start to talk about the texts. And here is what you get if you go and read, or something like this is what you get when you read a translation. This is from Aristophanes' Frogs, and you see it looks very much like a modern play. You have lines, and you have some stage directions, and it says exactly who is saying which line. This is not how the first texts that were written in ancient times, they didn't look like this at all. So if we go further and just look at how a Greek edition looks, it's a bit closer, because the text, they didn't have any stage directions. As you see here, there are no stage directions, but the text also didn't have any indication of the names of the speakers, as is written in this critical edition. Probably they have written it in because it is in some of the newer medieval manuscripts that we have. But if we look at a papyrus fragment that are some 100 years before the medieval times, this doesn't have any names of speakers. What it does have is like some small indication of where you change the speaker. So this is so kind of almost the same text. The interesting thing is that they don't actually agree on where. So this critical edition doesn't change the speaker at the same place as this papyrus. So it's a bit tricky. I will come back to that question. So we have so if the texts came without any stage directions, without even names of who the speakers were, and I don't think even these indications of change of speaker were actually part of the text. They are probably put there as like just a help for readers. And we know that in the festivals, they only allowed new plays. They didn't want any old play to perform in these festivals here. And the poets who wrote the plays, they would be present, so they could tell, yes, this actor should say this, and this should say this. They should do this and this on stage. How do we know that it didn't just that these texts that contain only the spoken words? How do we know that we actually understand anything of what was happening? Of course, it could be that the actors did a lot of things that are never mentioned in the text. So this is really like a a big problem, at least if you think about it. But for for 2,000 years at least, and more than that, people who read the Greek dramas, they didn't think about that, or at least they didn't mention that they had any problem with this. They thought that these texts are meaningful poetry that you can that you can read, and we don't have to assume that things happened on stage that would have changed the meaning totally or anything like that. That was the case at least until at least as far as I know, until the end of the 19th century. That's when the Dionysus Theatre was excavated, and some publications about this became very influential and popular. I just some of the first indications of, And then suddenly there was some interest about, where did on stage did he actually do stuff, and how did it work in this play when Agamemnon was killed, and then the bodies, they see the bodies, we see that, but how did the bodies come from there to there? And they had all of these questions suddenly about staging, and suddenly the trust in the dramatic texts disappeared. Or it didn't disappear. It started to get a bit shaken, and someone started to invent stage action that you couldn't see in the text, and then you get some reactions to that again. And one of the first reactions, Robert, a philologist and archaeologist, he responds to someone inventing stage action and says, you can't do that. Then the dramas can mean anything. So he comes with this long-standing principle, not yet rattled, that the stage directions in Greek drama are written in the text. Well, there are no stage directions, so that means what he means that the characters in the story will always say what is happening. I don't know why he thinks that, and I have no idea where he has this long-standing principle from, because I hope someone at some point will tell me who said it before him, because this is the first time I know anyone said that. Then you have other philologists like Zelensky. He's sort of part of the same discussion. He takes seriously this, that you can't really trust the texts. There could have been things happening, so he makes some principles. Let's make order in this. So yes, if you need to invent an action for the text to make sense, then you have to invent this action. This did not go well through with the most famous of philologists at that time, Wilamowitz. So he doesn't mention Zelensky directly, but it's clearly in response to his principles. But surely that which I have claimed before, and this is my translation from his Latin, it might be it's awkward, but surely that which I have claimed before, I hold even today, that the action is inferred with sufficient certainty from the words of the poets, and that it is for madmen to invent by oneself things that are not demonstrated by the words of the poet. Strongly stated, and he was an influential scholar, so that put the discussion at rest for a few decades. Actually. It was not until the 70s when there was a new movement within there had been for a long time a new movement in drama, research on drama, a performative turn. People realized that you had to, you could do research on performance as its own thing. It wasn't necessarily just a servant of like the dramatic text. You could analyze the performance, and when this idea came to Greek drama, it was already in the 1970s, and the first important scholar, or one of the first scholars who who began to think about how can we do research on Greek drama, but not only as literature, but as theater. It was Oliver Taplin, but he really took this idea seriously, that we don't actually, the texts don't tell us what is happening on stage, or at least we can't be sure that they do. He did not think that the poets had any concern for for how the text would be used after the first performance. They were interested in winning the prize of the first performance, not about how re-performances or that someone would read the texts or anything like that. So he really thought hard about it, and because there is this interesting thing that you usually understand the dramas. That's why they read them for 2 millennia without any concern. You understand what is happening. There are a lot of discussion of who says who what, but the story, you can get the story. But when Taplin wanted to do performance analysis on these, based on these texts, he had to be able to say that, yes, we can sort of say what happened on stage. And he sort of, well, his solution is quite famous. It's called the significant action hypothesis sometimes. And this is one of the formulations. It would be a good start if it could be broadly accepted that the words, if you know how to use them, give the significant action, and that there was no significant action other than that indicated by the words. His argument for this is kind of peculiar, I think. The most persuasive is that of course we usually understand what is happening, but the other is that he thinks that it is necessary in the theater for actors to talk about the important things that they are doing, so that the audience get it. And here is where my experience with theater comes in. I can't buy that at all. There's nothing more effective on stage than an actor doing something in silence. Or we don't know, of course, what the Greeks thought 2,500 years ago, but at least I can't go along with this argument that this was necessary. They had to talk about what they're doing. If you have seen really bad theater, sometimes they always talk about what they're doing on stage. And the Greek drama is not that. It's not bad theater. It's really good. So they don't actually talk about what they're doing on stage. We understand it anyway. So there is another scholar who, Taplin got a lot of criticism for this, but still I think you will find much research on Greek drama still would lean on this principle that Taplin comes with, but most will now instead lean on Martin Reverman's sort of more pragmatic ways of dealing with the problem that we can't know exactly what happened. It's like, if we want to do performance analysis, we should well, at least not invent things that goes against the text. That's the most important. And then we should take into consideration everything we know about the performance tradition. We have some clues in Plato, Aristotle, and other authors, and also, of course, the archaeology of the theater, some vase paintings maybe. There are some other sources than the texts, and we should take all of that into consideration when we reconstruct any ancient performance. So, and also the third principle, which I think is sort of a basic requirement of all humanistic research, is that you should openly disclose all the reasons why you introduce the concepts and the ideas you use. So, and this is where things are now, basically, and people still there is quite a strong idea that that doing research on Greek drama, you should at least in most cases, also think of how would this look on stage. And there's an idea that it's not like everybody does that, but it's at least not a foreign idea. And a lot of people write about performances of Greek drama, and then this is probably usually Reverman's pragmatic approach here is the one that they can lean on, or Taplin. Both are sort of cited still. And the problem is that Reverman's suggestion does not fix the problem that there could have been things happening that we know nothing about. There could be someone stabbing someone to death on stage, and it's not mentioned. And it could even, well, that's kind of unlikely, but there could be, like, we can't even begin to imagine what could have happened on stage that could change the meaning. So it's not totally satisfactory to me. My take on this, so now I have sort of led to where things are. I have, as Anastasia mentioned, written a PhD on this topic, and I have sort of tried to find out some better solution. And my conclusion, I can start with that, is that we should abandon the idea that the poets had no concern for the future of the text. And I have good reasons for thinking that. They absolutely have good reasons to think that they didn't have any concern for how the text would be used after the first performance. But I think if you look closely, you will find that there are reasons to think the opposite as well. My main argument for this is that if you read the dramatic texts without any names of speakers or indications of change of speaker at all, and you suppose, this is a requirement, you must suppose that the poet meant to make it possible to understand who the speaker is, then you can understand who the speaker is. It's quite astonishing that it's very rarely unclear who the speaker is. At least if you have to think that which speaker could the poet have thought that I would understand says this. It's a bit circumspect, but that's how interpretation works anyway. It's a sort of a circle. But so I'm going to show you just quickly one part of Aristophanes' piece. It's a very complex scene. I think it's my clumsy translation. It's not meant to be poetic. It's there are 3 people on stage that we know of, and there's Trigaios, the main character. He's preparing a sacrifice, helped by his slave, and we just got to know that there is a priest on his way towards them. So this is one of the most difficult texts to actually be sure who is speaking, but I think it's possible anyway. So let's pretend not to see him then. Good idea. What's this sacrifice, and for which one of the gods? Roast in silence and keep away from the rum. Won't you tell me who you're sacrificing to? The tale is doing well, really well. No, really well. My beloved Mistress Peace. Come on now. I'm not able to do all the 3 roles. I'm sorry. I mixed them up, but the ancient actors would be able to. Now I am the priest again. Come on now. Make the first cut and give it to me. It's better to roast it. I'm getting short of time, but if you look down here, there are so first they ignore the questions. Of course, we have been told that they will ignore the questions. They here he's interrupted in the middle of a sentence, and it continues, and there are lots of difficulties, but still it is, I would say, you can, at least to some reasonable certainty, know who is speaking everything of the text, which I think is almost impossible to think that it wasn't done on purpose. Of course, we can't know the minds of authors, but we can see the traces of I think a good example is to say, for example, Shakespeare. The texts of Shakespeare, they are very similar to Greek drama because they have very few stage directions, but they do have indications of speakers. And I went through Midsummer Night's Dream just as to check, and I took away all the names, and most of the time you think you get it right, but you get it wrong. But there are several places where you understand, you are sure that it's impossible to understand who says what. So, and you never get that in Greek drama. So I guess that's at least one way to argue that it was supposed to be understood. That means, so if they made this effort, this is not something the actors would have needed in the first performance because the poet were there to tell them. It was not something that the audience needed. If it was difficult to hear who was speaking behind the masks, the actors could move while speaking or something. It wasn't something necessary on stage. So it must be because the texts were meant to have a further life. Now, then we have a problem again. So if the texts were meant to be used in the future for some reason, I guess the most obvious reason it would be to be reperformed in contexts where the poet wouldn't be present, but or maybe they, as with all other poetry, they wanted their poetry to live on forever. That's the problem. Is why do they give so little information about staging? Why didn't they write stage directions? why didn't they write names of the people speaking? It's not like they couldn't invent that. I think they would, if it was perceived as a practical problem for them, then they would have done it. I'm quite sure. But why didn't they? Why? And what is this? What? It's kind of a conundrum, I think. And I have beginning of a suggestion to an answer to that. So if we read, there are some ancient sources that talk about drama, and we get some hints. And one of the hints is that they never talk. They, as I told you, they never have any problems with the meaning of the dramas. They don't think, oh, we don't know what happens on. We don't know what they did on stage, so we don't know what it means. That's never mentioned in ancient texts or later. But I think a hint is also that it's always treated as a form of poetry on the same level as all other poetry. I think one mistake of the pioneers of the performative turn in Greek drama is that they thought of drama and that it was performed as something very special, but all poetry and literature in general was performed in ancient times. Any poem. So for people then, drama didn't have a special status because it was performed. It was a special type of poetry, that's true, and it had a complex form of performance. But lyric poetry and epic poetry, people didn't sit and read it. They saw it and heard it. So I will a beginning to for understanding this came from Plato's Republic, book 3, where he talks about different forms of storytelling, or he distinguishes two different types of storytelling. It's diegetic or narrative, maybe you could say. So that's where Plato says the poet speaks as himself. That's what he says. What he means then is it's in a narrative form. It's not. It's when he can describe the world, he can describe the characters and what they're doing, and also describe and when people speak, it's in indirect speech. So it's not. So he went over to the chair, and then he said to him that I don't like you, or something. It's not direct speech, which would be the mimetic in this usage that Plato has in this passage in the Republic, book 3. He's talking about mimetic storytelling as actually as simple as poetry in direct speech. And then he explains, when there is direct speech, the one who is speaking for the character has to take on his voice and gestures. And this is something quite extraordinary, I think, because when you tell a story, you can stand and tell the story as yourself, but as soon as you go into direct speech, it's impossible. Whoever you speak as, you have to change your body and voice somehow. Unless because if yesterday I met my friend and he looked at me and said, "What?" And now I'm trying to not do anything. He looked at me and said, "What do you think?" And no, I have to he looked at me and said, "What do you think? I have to do something, even a small thing, and change my body. There's something happening inside me that makes me into him for a short while." And that's what Plato or Socrates in this in the Republic is sort of trying to explain, is that when you have direct speech, the storyteller in this case needs to form the body and voice after. And then he goes on to say, and you have some storytelling that is only diegetic, and then you have some storytelling that mix the two, which is kind of in the epic is quite normal. And then you have drama, where you have only mimetic. And then it's the point then is that my thinking is that if drama is an art, a form of poetry where you have no narrator, where you only have direct speech, and that is sort of a requirement for dramatic poetry, then having stage directions would be the same as introducing a narrator from the outside. So it would be sort of like cheating. And you would, even having the names of the speakers would be to say, and then he said, and then he said. So that would be considered, and I think for the poets, it was like an artistic challenge to compose a story, a full story that can work and people can understand with only direct speech. That is sort of some of the point. And that's why it would be like totally counterproductive to or at least an admission that you weren't able to do it if you needed to put stage directions. And there is also one more thing. This type of like direct speech, the type of process happening, it goes through the body. That's at least my impression. This is something I just take from acting experience. When I read this thing of reading the direct speech and not having a stage direction, I need to form okay, I try to demonstrate it, but you have to actually practice. But it comes from the body. It doesn't come from the head, and that's, at least in my experience, what makes a great acting. It's when it's not you don't think, oh, now I am angry. Or yeah, they had masks, so, but still, it's when it comes through some creative flow that you already have in the body, that you connect to what needs to be said. And I think that is sort of also what Plato is talking about here. So my conclusion to this conundrum, the problem, why don't they have stage directions? And also, if you look at the dramas, they don't have like this. They don't do what Taplin says. They don't talk about what they're doing, because if they had talked about what they're doing, it would sort of be counterproductive. It would be, or they talk about what they're doing exactly as much as they have to for us to understand the story. Nothing, not more. So that is the conclusion. So the dramatic form of the poetry that were performed in the Greek drama, it had two main reasons. It had like this artistic challenge for the poets to compose stories without a narrator, which also was a challenge to the ones who were interpreting it into performance, of course, for the actors. And it was an aesthetic device to engage the bodily imagination of the actors, which I think it is extremely effective at doing. And that is, in my view, one of the reasons why the Greek drama, even in our time, is perceived as effective, not only as literature, but also in performance. That is my conclusion. Yeah.
I have 20 questions, at least. First of all, I'm not at all educated in ancient Greek, but the fact that there was no punctuation to me is the first big problem. There's no punctuation. How do you navigate it? In Shakespeare, we do have punctuation. Mm-hmm. We don't have, as you say, stage directions. Okay, but in the little that remains of the whole body of ancient Greek theatre, mm-hmm. a great part of it is based on myths and stories that have been told over and over again. Therefore, they're already, from the audience and from the poet, the knowledge of what sort of words or what is in that person's story that would indicate, would take him to say this or that or the other, and whose mother, whose father, etc., etc. Costumes are a way of defining the role of somebody on stage. It's a comic, is this and that, the other thing. Commedia dell'arte. You don't need a name, you don't need anything. All you have to do is see, the costume, and who's Harlequin. The whole thing is said, and they represent basically characteristics of human personalities, of the good, the evil, the comic, the one that always wins, the one that always loses, right? So my question is, as part of obviously the body of theater that has survived, that indicates that, like this particular Aristophanes, because I think also one has to make a division between starting from Aeschylus to Sophocles to Aristophanes, the period, what is happening in the life of the city, because we're talking about Athens, not anywhere else in Greece. So it has a relationship to do with the current life. Are they under war, just after war? Are we impoverished? The political sense, so on and so forth. And then things that come from le fait du jour. What are people talking about? I mean, was there a particular crime, or as in the case of the piece, the paragraph, which is really, totally ambiguous. Yeah, I suppose there might have been, anybody could make a sacrifice, but if it's a rich person, what kind of animal is it? It's a bigger, animal, it's a smaller animal. What god you're sacrificing to? It always defines something. So it's Pandora's box. Your subject is Pandora's box. It's fascinating. But when was the last time that we are aware of the last indication that a Greek drama was performed, and where? Then
in the ancient times.
Did the Romans take on any?
Well, they were. I think they were performances in Athens until at least the 1st century AD, but perhaps second. I think I'm not an expert on that actually, but that's what I remember reading. So it was a continuous tradition of many centuries. But the problem is we have texts only from two centuries, and very few from only Menander from like the latest part. So it's the texts are from a very, very concentrated period, and then after that we don't really know much what happened. But they performed.
But there's no reference in the future, you know, of these Greek plays.
What do you mean?
They completely disappear. And I mean, they are only found because we found bits.
No, we have lots of references and titles, and we have inscriptions with the titles of plays and actors and the poets.
And the dates.
Many of them, yes.
But it was not pursued outside of Greece. There's no.
Oh yeah. Well, when during the Hellenistic times, Greek dramas were performed from North Africa to far into Asia.
And isn't there a possibility that, you know, it is slightly influenced by local culture wherever else it was happening? Absolutely.
But we have no idea of knowing anything about those that we don't have the text from or any description or anything. We have theaters. That's the only thing.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for your translations and the great work you're doing there, and thank you for this lecture. I was thinking, since you mentioned also that you yourself have, you know, are an actor, and so you have this experience with performance, and then I wonder, could some of the questions you have raised have been raised before the age of Regietheater and Regieoper? Because I think it has changed so much of how we relate to the textuality of the dramatic and operatic pieces. And that it was perfectly normal, you know, further back to think of this as music, which in fact also is the, you know, the tradition that the drama springs out of, you know, the rhapsodies and you know, the rhythmic performance, that you don't, you know, you don't need to take so much of movement around the stage into the picture, because that's a more of a modern thing. And so as it has already been mentioned, the use of masks and positioning can also help understand who is saying what, and thinking, comparing. So for me, you know, the music is a reference in this, and that and before you had this, you know, the Regieoper thing, you know, it was people would just stand there, and then whoever would sing what, you know, they didn't do very much. It was very static in a way, and this is why people found it boring in our time and age. But I'm just thinking of it as an analogy to what you're talking about, as a way of understanding the question that you have been repeating, that how could people know? Because the opera is in a way a modern analogy to that, or a half modern. So you do know because of the positioning of, they didn't really do very much. They would stand there and they would sing the different voices, and the dress, and the ancients wore masks. So although I mean, the textuality is one thing, but you know, if you think of how these plays were actually performed, I also think that much of the answer is there.
Yeah. So yeah, I totally agree that the questions that we ask, just both we and earlier, is of course colored a lot by our own theater culture. So and I think perhaps so when we got like this modern drama with Ibsen, with like a lot of stage directions suddenly, and then of course it's not so strange that that's sort of when people started to look at the Greek dramas and see they are nothing like that. Why? But and the other, I think the actually peculiar thing with the Greek drama isn't really, oh, we can't know what they did, because we can. That's the amazing thing. And it wasn't static. At periods in theater history, people thought that it was static, but they can't have read the texts very carefully, because from the text themselves we can know about a lot of action happening on stage. Even though it's not said straight out, we know that it happened. And that's sort of I think that is the most enigmatic thing, that they managed to make get so much action put into the text without stating it. And but it is there.
So thank you, Robert, for a very interesting, stimulating, and thought-provoking lecture. I was wondering, my impression is that there is not much reference to gestures, like they don't say how they're gesticulating, and this to me is a kind of indication of the playwright giving freedom to the actors to use their body. And also another perspective to this freedom. I agree with you that they were that they would be interested for the preservation of their plays, and that their plays would. But at the same time, we know that in the 4th century there was a measure of interpolation in the text by the authors, by the actors, who were inserting short passages just to show their kind of talent in inventing small bits. Wouldn't this also tally with the idea that the authors left them a measure of freedom to the actors and the dramatists for the staging?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the fact that there are so few mentioning of what people actually do on stage, but it's to make a freedom, or make it possible for the actors to be authentic on stage, I guess. That's what I think. When it comes to the interpolations, I'm not sure what I think about it, but I'm turning towards being a bit skeptical to a lot. I've looked at when I've translated the Helen, for instance. There's like they take away the editors take away almost everything, many percent of the text as interpolation, and it's of course because they have only one manuscript, so they can use their knife on the text. But I think almost none of them are correct. I think most of it is authentic. But I haven't looked like on everything, and so I'm a bit skeptical. There are mention in Scholia about this is an actors interpolations, but the people who have researched that, I read at least an article that they are not skeptical that there were interpolations, but almost none of the ones that are marked as such in the Scholia are correct. So at least in their view, I haven't looked closely enough on it. So I'm not sure. Also, I think people really. Reason I say this, I think they had more respect for the poetry than most people have for dramas nowadays. Because when people put up a Ibsen now. They tear it apart. I don't think I think they wanted to put up the poem of Euripides, but at least I don't think that the texts we have so much that when you spend a few thousand or maybe €1,000, I guess, on a copy of Euripides, you don't want that copy that some random actors have put interpolations. You want the actual one, I think, but I don't know.
I think you had raised your hand before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Excuse me for it's a naive suggestion, question, idea. It just came up. If there was movement and gestures, why should we build such a big orchestra in the theaters, especially in the size of Figaro's theater, without movement?
Well, the dancers were dancing, of course, so they needed the space for dancing. But another question is whether the actors who were not dancing were standing like this or acting like.
Yes, but the dancers were quite. They were represented the common sense, the population of the. So they were not real dance. It was something like actor dancers. So.
Yeah, no. Obviously, they needed the space. The dancers needed the space. That's clear. Since, or else you are right, or else the orchestra would be small.
But that also raises the point that you can have the interpreters, meaning interpreters, actors, dancers, and the chorus. For instance, interpreting what actually the voice is saying. Therefore, that determines the movement of the dancers. And actually, there's not necessarily a movement from the voice. The voice is the voice. It indicates who the character is by his attire, by his costume. And the dancers interpret the meaning.
That could be where we
have something that can be applied to any text.
We don't know anything about the dances, except that they probably follow the rhythms of the words.
What if actually the text is just an indication of what to base a performance on, and not the sacred text? I mean, even Shakespeare's like.
Yes.
Change on that, or whatever.
Yes, of course, I agree, but I think the thing is that the texts are meaningful.
Oh yes.
So we don't need to despair. On well, there are many things you mentioned that we don't know. All this, the meaning of this thing could, of course, allude to something happening in the real life. If we don't know about that, we are in the dark, of course. So a lot of things we must despair for getting the meaning of the dramas.
Because let's say, classical texts of theater, be it Shakespeare or anything even much more recent. Look how many radio performances there are. And that is how much power the voice has. And how much by punctuation or simply by the rhythm of your voice and so on, you can alter a meaning.
Absolutely.
Or, see it from a different direction. And this is these days, directors and actors play on that.
Yeah,
that's why I said Pandora's box. It's there's no limit to the questions we can raise.
as I said from the start, we have a lot to go.
Okay, well, just keep on taking it.
Let's have another lecture on the topic, then, or a
It's
workshop.
fascinating.
Or,
It's one of the,
yes.
you know,
It is. Thank you so much for this
Opening up.
this subject. If there are
Yes.
no other
There
comments,
was
then we can
one.
continue.
He has been trying a while.
Yes. Thank you. I'll be really quick so we can end on a positive note. So we were previously discussing about like how they were preserved and like why do we know how it like mimetic text, like why do we to preserve it? And my thoughts always came up to the fact that many historians of later based on the contemporary people in this time frame mention like actors and poets, their performances as you know, at this year this guy did that, and this year this person who was in his 70s, no, respectable person, won an award for his performance in this drama. So at this point, when, as you also mentioned, that dramas are meant to be not to be kept for one-time purpose, to be repurposed as form of poetry, form of literature, should be also be considered form of like public domain at some point. That okay, Aeschylus did a great drama of the suppliants, loved it. I'm gonna go home to learn now. I remember everything by heart. I have a few friends of mine. I'm quite rich, okay? Just so we're clear. I'm a citizen, I'm rich. I'm going home to learn now. I'm getting this gang together. We're going to the theater. We're performing. Aeschylus, he doesn't have a copyright on it. He doesn't have a trademark or anything to, you know, he's the author, sure, but how can he enforce it? That was my comment when it first came. And my second question was mostly about like how you mentioned that it's a more direct form of acting, not the chorus itself, the actors, how they are more direct. But I made a mistake in here. I had a class, so I'm getting my professor's knowledge that actors used different kinds of shoes, costumes, and they would have, from what I have archaeological evidence, some clothes would be like used for certain occasions only. Yes, you're not running back and forth every 5 minutes to change your costumes, but how you lift your is important.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same when you do it nowadays in your performances. That's it.
Yeah. No, there's some very interesting points. When it comes to the last part, the use of costumes and such, all the sources, most or at least of the sources we have are quite late, long after the dramas that we have the texts for. So it's a bit we have there are indications in some base paintings and some things, but to say that there were specific ways they used shoes and the costumes in the 5th century, I would say probably they used all of the means they had, and maybe some things became more habitual, and some things were kept, some things were not. But we know so little about what they actually did of that kind of things in the 5th century, at least.
So I'm sorry, is it because they wanted to win? Because these authors wanted to win?
Yeah.
And so they would give the freedom to the actors and to the poets to be quite natural. You have a script, all of it be natural.
Yeah, so the poets, so we know that in the beginning the poets were also the actors, but after a while they gave that over to other people. And I guess, as you're right, they wanted to win. They wanted the best people. So they learned that if they are too strict in controlling the actors, they don't work well. They don't win. So they need to do it better. Probably. That's speculation, but that's yeah.
Should we continue over to the next room with a glass of wine?
Yeah, I think
continue the discussion.